Okay. All right. Without further ado, I'll hand it over to Chalice.
Thank you so much, Megan, and thank you everyone who is attending today. As Megan mentioned, my name is Challice LaRose. I am the BSW Online Coordinator for the School of Social Work, and today we're going to be talking about generative AI and social work practice. And really, when I was kind of coming up and revamping this over the last couple of days, I really looked at it as like informed consent for us of like looking at the risks and the benefits of using generative AI, whether personally, academically, through practice, what have you. So that's kind of the basis of what we'll be talking about today. And hopefully my slides advance okay. Maybe. There we go. So as I mentioned, BSW Online Coordinator, I have over 8 years in higher education, previously at a community college and now here at WVU for the last little over a year. And previous to that, I worked in the kind of child welfare and juvenile justice realm. Couple disclaimers just as we're going through this. I'm not an MIT grad with a computer science master's degree or anything really cool like that. I'm not a guru. I'm not a computer whiz. You know, a lot of this is just research on my own. So if you're wanting really technical, high level information about AI and how it works, I probably can't answer that. But when we're looking at more like layman's terms, we might be able to talk about that a little bit more, and we will today. And I do mention some generative AI programs, some social work related tools also, and I have no affiliation with any of those. I'm not kind of paid to share them with you. I don't know anyone that works at any of them or anything like that. Just ones that I've found or that others have shared with me too. So I just wanted to mention that before we get started. And then looking at the learning objectives, like I mentioned, really kind of looking at the risks and benefits and understanding what generative AI is and how we can use it. Looking at some ethical implications and risks associated with its use, and then how can we responsibly integrate it, if we wanted to, into whether a personal life, academic life, or professional practice. Some things I like to kind of start with just because I think it's interesting. And for us kind of history buffs out there, maybe you'll find this interesting too. But I think when we think of AI, I think we think of it as something that's more recent when that's really not the case. So for my millennial self, I'm just always stuck in the 90s. So I reference time back to the 90s, right? So like 1950, that was only 40 years ago. That's not true. It was 73 years ago that we first really started to see artificial intelligence emerge. So back in the 50s, we could tie artificial intelligence to that time. In 1952, we saw a computer scientist by the name of Arthur Samuel who designed a program to play chess independently, so it could just play chess on its own. A couple years later, we saw the first use of the term artificial intelligence by John McCarthy during a workshop at Dartmouth. And then a couple years after that, the same guy, Arthur Samuel, kind of termed machine learning when he was describing how he was teaching machines to play chess better than those who program them. So we can connect AI all the way back to the 50s. And using chat, if you guys could, for me, that was supposed to wait and it didn't, but what are some AI tools or programs that you can think of? Try and stay away from generative AI. Think of just AI in general. If you want to put in chat some things that you're used to using in everyday life that is considered artificial intelligence. And I will jump into chat and check those. Customer support chats. Yeah, good job. That is true. Alexa, yep, I have that on there. Some people are mentioning some generative AI. That's totally fine. ChatGPT, Copilot, Google AI Overview. We'll talk about some of these things today. Siri, yeah, Siri and Alexa, those voice, oh, I can't say her name too loud. She might hear me. Those voice assistants, spam filters, Netflix recommendations, so autofill forms, auto reply prompts, GPS, yeah, GPS navigation, that's artificial intelligence. I would say Grammarly's It depends on the level of Grammarly, I think. I think originally it was kind of AI and now it might be more generative AI. I don't use it that much. Yeah, I would say car safety sensors for sure, because if it's detecting the like a car or a person, just like for again those millennials like me, if you had an Xbox back in like early 2000, well 2010 I think, Xbox came out with the Kinect, which was this like black bar that you could put in front of your TV and it would detect your body movements, so you could do like Dance Dance Revolution and it was like accurately doing your stuff. Face detection, AI stuff, yeah, absolutely. Perfect. Okay, cool. So we have AI in our lives all around us, right? And some people have mentioned generative AI, which we're going to get into right now. And Canva really wants to be slow today, moving forward. So looking at the timeline of generative AI. So AI, kind of an umbrella, generative AI kind of tucked under that. So I think we've seen this kind of emerge more recently, but it really does kind of stem back a little over 10 years ago into 2014, where we had a computer scientist Ian Goodfellow and his colleagues at the University of Montreal started creating this new approach to machine learning. So we tied machine learning back to the 50s, but now we've got this newer approach that is kind of creating these generative adversarial networks. So those neural networks that we know of for that generative AI uses. And that's what allows the AI to generate original output. So rather than kind of detecting or kind of predicting, it's really able to generate something new. A couple years after that, in 2017, Google researchers really started to make this architecture for developing large language models, which is what is used to train things like ChatGPT. And some of those models too can access and scour public data, and then some are trained on data sets. And we'll talk about that here in a little bit. But where I think we really saw this like kickoff of generative AI for those who kind of weren't really in that world, weren't computer scientists from MIT or anything like that, was this release of ChatGPT 3 by OpenAI. It just really became this like viral sensation. It amassed 1 million users in over just 5 days. So it surpassed Snapchat, I think, had like the official title, like the I'm the king of the most downloads or whatever, or most users. So ChatGPT did surpass that. However, ChatGPT has been around since 2018. So its first version came out in 2018. I think we're now on the 5th version, but we really saw this kind of viral sensation in 2022 for generative AI. So what is generative AI as we know? And I think it's important to kind of understand a little bit about it. As I mentioned before, generative AI creates new content. You know, a lot of it was focusing on text, but now we're seeing images, we're seeing music, we're even seeing videos. And, you know, back in the day, I think, and I say back in the day, I mean like last year, I think generative AI images were pretty easy to detect because they'd have like 6 fingers or their fingers would look really funky. And that's based on the multiple different ways hands can look, whether physically or how we hold our hands and stuff like that. But things are getting better. But what generative AI is doing in a very basic way is recognizing a pattern, predicting what it thinks should come next, and then outputting that. So you can kind of look at it like a really super powered autocomplete. We talked about like those autocompletes in like emails, like predictive text. So like super powered that. But AI, generative AI is like a type of deep learning where we're using multiple layers of artificial neural networks to process information. So what it's doing, you kind of like analogy to like filtering coffee. So it has, you have your first filter, you pour your water through with your grinds in it, and you filter out most of that. But now you want to refine that. So you've got a second filter, you do that again, and you do that again. And so those multiple layers, those multiple filters assist generative AI to continue to kind of refine its answers and what it's predicting and what it's going to output. Um, As I mentioned, generative AI are really these large language models, and what they are trained on these large data sets. And for example, ChatGPT 3 was trained on 45 terabytes of information. 45 doesn't sound like a big number. 1 terabyte equates to 6.5 million document pages. So just a single page of information. 1 terabyte is 6.5 million. So if I times that by 45, that's 292.5 million document pages that ChatGPT 3 was trained on. So a lot of information it's trained on. What it is trained on, it's kind of like this mind dump. And so it's using that unlabeled data that was fed to it to filter it through those coffee filters, to learn those patterns, refine those patterns, and then create its own predictive tasks. So it doesn't know facts like a person does. So I say it's not Ken Jennings. Like it can't just like come up with this information on its own in the sense that it's just a response. It's predicting what could or should be the answer to your prompt, if that makes sense. One other thing I wanted to mention are, someone mentioned Google AI. Maybe, I don't know if that was the AI overview, but those search engine integrations, those are retrieval-based AI. So it's really like a Google search of a Google search in my mind. It's pulling information from different resources and saying, here's this summary of it. The issue with that is it can pull context out of context. So for example, kind of looking at it this way, I took my son to a W football game this past weekend, and I realized I took a picture of him doing the third down chant, like cheer, like we're on defense. You do like the three in the sign language, and you kind of like wiggle your fingers, what have you. But the way his hand was positioned in the picture, it looks like he's making a not so nice hand gesture. You just can't see his other two fingers. So that's kind of what the search engine integration is doing, is it's pulling context and giving you that snippet that may not be the whole picture. So I saw a Google AI overview being incorrect about a radio station I listened to, a radio program I listened to. It said that it was no longer on air and just left it at that. I didn't give additional context. That was half true. It was off air on a radio network in Kansas. The radio show is still on, still going. So just be mindful when using the Google AI overview. I think it's a good start. You can click on like the little link beside the information it gives you to see where it's pulling that information from. And then you can go to those original resources or original sources. One thing I did notice when clicking that link, it does pull information from like Facebook posts and Reddit threads. So again, it may not be accurate information. I even saw a Google AI overview recommending using glue to keep pizza cheese on. Your pizza cheese slides off. It recommended to use glue. I don't think we should be using glue for pizza cheese. But just using chat. So in the chat, how do you use generative AI, whether that's personally, clinically, your agency, academically? What are ways that you're using generative AI currently? In what ways are you guys using it kind of personally? You don't have to like give real specifics, but are you just like using it to brainstorm, using it to kind of play around with and just ask questions to see what it comes up with, creative outlet, resume revamps, coming up with fancy football team names, brainstorming? Yeah, and if you don't use it, absolutely. Absolutely nothing wrong with that. Healthy eating ideas, research, trying to make sure I catch everyone. That's meeting minutes, yeah. Difficult conversations, so coming up with some ideas of how to word things or address things. Professional evals, middle step when writing. You have general thoughts and concepts, and then using AI to organize and then edit. Great. So some definitely great ideas, references in APA format, create images, fill in ideas for discussion questions. Yeah. Okay. So a lot of great things, and I'll kind of list a few more. And again, this is not necessarily an exhaustive list of what we're using. So basic, it generates new content, right? One example I wanted to share was this fun podcast tool through Notebook LM, where I uploaded a file of all of this content that I had in my asynchronous course that I had typed up, and it created a podcast of two people that sound very real. And they're just having a podcast on that topic. And it's not like reading verbatim what I gave it. It's putting some filler in there too. And it was very natural sounding, very engaging sounding podcast. But just to add to some things that other people have said, summarizing files and text and presentations. So, I've seen, like, let's say there's a House bill or a Senate bill, and I really just am not understanding what it's saying. Like, this legal jargon is just not making sense to me. Uploading that file into something like a ChatGPT and asking it to summarize it in a way that I can understand. Brainstorming, coming up with ideas. I think some people have mentioned that, as well as editing, writing, or assisting with word choice. I think a lot of people that I talk to use it primarily for that. Like, here, I have this general idea. It's my original idea, but I just can't think of a way to word it better than how I have it. Using it to transcribe. So I think someone said meeting minutes. So it can, there's some transcription helpers that can be in a Zoom meeting and can transcribe the meeting minutes for you, saving a lot of time there. Can do, transcription verbally or handwritten notes, translations as well. Role playing, analyzing data, finding research someone else mentioned, doing some drafts. People have mentioned things, planning, whether that's trips or budgeting or meal plans. Let's say I'm a full-time employee and a full-time student and a full-time parent and all this stuff, and I just need a better schedule. So asking for how can I break down my day better to maximize my time, things like that. And that's certainly not exhaustive. As someone else mentioned, having someone that create a whole slide deck for a presentation. I did not do that here. This is my own typing, painfully typed on Canva. It's really slow for me, but clarifying legal documentation, yeah, absolutely. So a lot of uses, and that's not all of the uses, certainly. But when we're also using it, there are some things we need to consider, and it's some things ethically, limitations, concerns, why people may not use it a lot or at all, or maybe kind of weary of using it or try to limit their use. Some of the things that can be of concern is the lack of diversity in AI creators. So it can have this harmful bias in its outputs based on the information that it was, what it was fed and who's creating it. Another big thing that happened was kind of exposed in 2023 that OpenAI, who owns or who provides ChatGPT, outsourced labor to Kenyans earning less than $2 a day to make ChatGPT less toxic. So it was originally pretty toxic, had some harmful content it would also output. And so they had to kind of read and watch things to erase that from the content that it could kind of derive information from. So not only are we outsourcing labor, paying $2 a day, but also asking them to look at and filter out pretty harmful content that they may not be trained to handle. It can also impersonate. I know WeBot, which is an AI social work chatbot, got in trouble for impersonating a therapist. Like, instead of really specifying that that was a chatbot and not a real person, it did not do that and attempted to impersonate a person. As I mentioned, it can generate harmful content based on biases that may exist in its original content. It can make things up. It can have hallucinations or confabulation, which can then lead to the concern of information integrity, or is this information accurate? The information that's being shared, is it accurate? Is it real? Seeing images in the videos that are getting pretty good. I think ChatGPT had this like look to it when you had images, but now there's more than just ChatGPT and they're having videos. Yes. And we'll talk about environmental concerns on the next slide. I kind of pulled that for its own separate conversation. Concerns about human reliance on it, right? Like how much are we relying on AI? How much are people kind of being connected to AI, whether that's original thought, critical thinking, analysis, stuff like that. And then, of course, our data privacy. What are we putting into it? What are they using it for? I heard someone mention, if this product is free, like ChatGPT, and a lot of them, we're like really no longer the customer. We are the product, right? We are helping them produce this to be better than it is. So just something to kind of consider there too. But yes, environmental impacts. I originally had that on this slide, and I felt like it really needed its own attention. So with ChatGPT or really any large language model, I just keep picking on ChatGPT because I think that's the one that most people have heard of. There are a lot of environmental impacts and of course, things we should be concerned about. One of which is a high energy consumption. Just to even just train them, not even talking about the millions of users daily that utilize AI or generative AI in some sort, but just the training of them uses so much energy. Some estimates have equated to like just training a model. So let's say training ChatGPT 3 uses enough energy to power a a couple hundred houses for the entire year. So what our houses use is just a fraction of what it is that the energy output and energy required to just train AI, generative AI, let alone use it as well. Carbon emissions is another big one. There's estimated that it can use emit hundreds of tons of CO2 in just that training of it again. And that can equate to like the lifetime CO2 emissions of just a couple cars. So just an astronomical amount of carbon emissions. Water uses is a big one. I told this to my husband and he was like, how does generative AI use water? Data centers use water to cool down their machines. They're using a lot of water to cool down the machines that are doing all these things. For example, ChatGPT used 3 when it was being trained. It used 180,000 gallons of water just to cool the machines down, which equates to the amount of water it takes to build 300 cars. So we're just training one model, a generative AI, 180,000 gallons of water. Land and minerals is another thing. I haven't seen it in my area, but I know just in Virginia, and there's been some in like Colorado and Utah, pushback on these data centers being built. They're just really popping up everywhere. So not only just building on this land that may have been used for other things, may have been farmland, may have been just trees, but then also mining the materials needed for the hardware for these computers, which then leads to this electronic waste because they're being used so much, and they just also have a short lifespan. So now we have a larger amount of hardware waste, electronic waste as well. Any other kind of ethical, and I'm not talking necessarily about social work, but just really these other like limitations and environmental impacts that I may not have mentioned, please feel free to put that in chat too, and we can mention that as well. I'm sorry, my slides are taking forever. So this is kind of a rhetorical question, I think, but how should we not use AI, generative AI? I really try to warn people away from using it as like a Google search, like asking who won the Super Bowl in 2008. It's probably trained on that information. It might be able to predict that information and tell you whether that's accurate or not. But we don't need to like generate this high electric output to ask simple questions. I've heard of people who they try to use it, but they'll kind of call other people and like, hey, I'm using ChatGPT today. Do you have anything to input? And they'll like input it all at one time. The larger prompts, the less we have to kind of interact. can reduce some use there too. So some people just prefer not to use it. That's totally fine. I think it's just what you feel comfortable with. But I really try to push people away from using it for like really minimal tasks that we could do, or we could use ways that are less energy consuming to do. And moving on. So kind of looking at some things for generative AI uses in social work. And again, feel free to kind of put things in chat for how you're using it through, your professional practice, or your agency's using it too. But a big thing, I think, is administrative task, documentation, emails, meeting minutes, meeting agendas, notes, really taking that kind of time away from doing that and having more time to do other things. Um, People are using generative AI for resource identification, diagnostic impressions. There's apps for mental health. There's chatbots, which I have a slide on those as well. Producing case scenarios and kind of role playing with it as well. Grant writing. So whether that's kind of, doing that editing piece of, hey, I have this, but I don't think this is worded very well. Creating or coming up with fundraising ideas or materials, generating engaging social media content as well. I know coming from the nonprofit world, we didn't have someone that was just the social media person, and that fell on other people. So being able to do that more engaging and quickly. I've seen people use it for self-care. I think someone mentioned like healthy eating. So thinking, coming up with, helping it and asking it to come up with ideas for self-care. I'm doing this, but this exercise routine I don't exercise, is not working. What are some other ideas if I'm targeting this, or this? We also see it for policy analysis, program evaluation, data analysis to identify trends. There was actually a research out of Florida State that they used AI, generative AI for data analysis, and they were able to state that they could predict suicidal ideation with an 80 to 90% accuracy based on clients' files, that they had it kind of analyze the data from that. So those are some ways, but if there's other ways, please feel free to put those in chat so we can all kind of learn together on different ideas of how to use it if we would want to. But what are the ethical implications for social work besides the things we've already mentioned? I think one of those things obviously is client privacy and confidentiality. What information are we putting, being input? Where is it going? How's it being stored? How's it being shared? We have to make sure that that program is compliant with HIPAA and confidentiality practices, other privacy regulations, stuff like that. But I think we could just have concern that we might not really know what it's doing, or that they say it's doing this, but it might not be doing that, stuff like that. Informed consent, obviously making sure that clients are aware of how AI is being used with either their information or at the agency or what have you, and just being kind of transparent about that, and informing them of the limitations, risks, benefits, all of that stuff. Something else I think we need to be mindful of too is the digital equity that's involved with this. Are we creating a bigger divide by use of AI? Are our clients able to access the technology that we may be asking them to use, or that they need to use to access our services, or what have you? Do they have that? There's counties in West Virginia that have over 60% of the households that do not have broadband access. So they can't, even if they could pay for it, they simply do not have broadband access. So we have several counties in West Virginia that are over 50% of households do not have broadband access, 9 of them, I believe. So just something to be mindful too with that. And really just kind of any telehealth situations too. Accountability. So who's responsible if AI makes a mistake or is harmful to a client in some way? We need to kind of just remember that it augments and it's not to replace. So keeping that accountability piece too. Professional boundaries. how are we keeping those boundaries set with AI? How, again, not replacing our human interaction, but just augmenting that. Cultural competence, we talked about some of that bias, and that's also part of the next one too. But, AI, especially, let's say it's recording my therapy session with a client and gonna kind of do a note for me. Like, is it capable of picking up on some of those cultural nuances or dialect or things like that when it's writing that note too? And so we also needed to make sure that we're reviewing those outputs for cultural sensitivity. The same with bias, looking and making sure that that what it's outputting isn't based on biased information. If this generative AI is trained on historical data, which obviously we know can be biased or has biases related to it, whether racial, gender, socioeconomic, what have you, could its outputs then, whether that's for recommendations, assessments, notes, what have you, can those outputs be biased? So again, reviewing that information. Another kind of thing to think about is re-traumatization. Are we asking clients to use it and then it has simulations to it that we're asking them to do or view this or what have you that could be re-traumatizing to someone? And then also just remembering to fall back on our code of ethics. I have not seen anything by the NASW that has said yes or no to using generative AI or yes or no to using this tool or that tool or anything like that. But, thinking about how we have to maintain confidentiality with technology, that kind of access to technology piece, that digital equity, and keeping up on knowing about it, knowing what generative AI is, knowing the tool that we're using as much as possible. I think someone else mentioned Heidi Health AI tool to help with writing notes. Oh, great. Thank you for sharing that because I'll share a few, but again, it's not an exhaustive list. A few that have been mentioned to me or that I've found. So in chat, they mentioned Heidi Health. That's an AI tool to help with writing notes that are HIPAA compliant. TheraPro is kind of similar, I believe, in that. It's recording and listening to your session. It's writing your notes. It's kind of it says it takes names out, deletes the recording, so it just leaves the note. And the kind of individuals who have used it kind of report that they're reducing burnout by having that helpful tool and more of an ability to be present in the session rather than trying to think, okay, I'm going to have to write this down, I'm going to have to write this down, what have you. Again, HIPAA compliant. It says it deletes things, but what does that look like? What does it mean it deletes it? Is it still accessible somewhere? Just some concerns I would have, but being able to talk to TheraPro through those. But again, they're selling a product to you, right? So just trying to be mindful of that too. There's Social Work Magic is this kind of a website that has guidance and mentorship and chatbots and specialized assistance that if you're kind of looking for more guidance, support, or resources on a certain topic, you can engage with this like specialized chatbot assistant on that topic itself. It also has some templates to use as well. Elios is pretty similar to TheraPro. It did have a compliance dashboard, so it could kind of check your notes for you, making sure you're in compliance with things that you may need to report in those or, that kind of stuff. So those are just a few. If you have others that you know of, please put them in chat. There may be people in the audience that are interested in looking at these things and exploring them, whether for their agency or their professional practice to potentially use. So yeah, I guess that is a question of intellectual property. Like if depending on the AI platform you're using, you don't own the content generated, and I would say that would be kind of accurate. It isn't necessarily our information. That came up in a group that I was in on Monday. If I'm using Copilot through the university and I'm putting information in it, those are my ideas that I'm putting in there, obviously not the content that's coming out, but my input is my thought. But now do I own that thought anymore? Does that become intellectual property of the university because they own the license for Copilot, or does Microsoft own that? Yeah, I don't think I really know the answer to that. And I would have to say that we wouldn't own the material that it generated, necessarily. But I also don't, the question can be too of at what point do we lose our right to our intellectual property from what we've inputted into those things too. Um, what else were we going to mention? So this came from a training I attended through Marshall University, and they actually used ChatGPT to come up with this chart of kind of AI tools. One of those, Wobot was that one that impersonated a therapist. They got in trouble for that. So, but they're on the list. But there's some other ones on there. BetterHelp, I've heard of. Calm, I think we've all heard of too. But they have some AI, either chatbots or AI powered coaching, or mindfulness recommendations, AI powered guided meditation, sleep improvement. Really a lot of different things. So I can leave it on the screen if you want to take a picture of that, but this will also, yes, I'll download this. It's Canva, but I'll download it and send it to Dr. Fabry so you guys can have this PDF version of it as well. And just a couple more slides, and we're pretty good on time, so we should have time for questions too. One other thing I wanted to mention, because it's related to AI, is virtual reality. And there's kind of two that I've seen or heard of. One is the virtual social work training, VSWT, through the University of Utah. So it uses virtual reality headsets that's designed to train child welfare workers. So it's assisting them on those core practice skills that they may need to have for home visits. It's helping them kind of do simulations with motivational interviewing and stuff like that. It seemed, for someone who worked in the child welfare realm, it seemed pretty interesting and pretty neat. We also have from our very own Western University, I think Dr. Gandy is or was in here, created Play Higher. And if I kind of butcher some of this, please feel free to chime in, Dr. Gandy. But it's really designed for middle school and high school students to learn about the field of behavioral health. And she kind of works with what we're calling Play Higher pioneers, which are school social workers, counselors, teachers that can bring this game to their school with a headset for students to use. And now it is available on the MetaQuest app. I think that was a big feat. And so congratulations on that, getting into the MetaQuest app. But two kind of virtual reality AI platforms, if you want to call them, or tools used to kind of get people interested in social work, or also train more specifically in social work. A couple things to consider. I think we've talked about some of the ethical implications, but some other things that I like to mention, one of which is how you prompt AI. And I didn't include any examples in this just for time's sake. But, if you're even just for personal use, really be specific with your prompt. When I'm prompting ChatGPT for something, it's generally a pretty long paragraph. I'm very specific with it. This is what I don't want, like even including things like, I don't want this. I don't want you to focus on that. I just want 5 words. I don't want, ChatGPT especially can be very verbose, and I think most generative AI tools like that can be pretty verbose. So it'll give you a lot of information when you just really wanted a sentence. So being really specific, and I think that also helps cut down on our use of it, right? So if I can design my prompt for it to be, and for it to give what I want it to give me, then I can cut down on having to exchange with it back and forth and back and forth, and it continuing to process, filter, predict, generate that content. So things like that, I think, are helpful, of just being mindful of how you're prompting it. And again, being specific with it. I had a student, as an example of a way that if you're not specific, it can misunderstand what you're asking it. I had, unfortunately, a student at my previous institution copy and paste a discussion prompt, put it into ChatGPT, and just then copy and paste what it gave her. I'm sure no other additional prompting or what have you. And ChatGPT misunderstood my prompt. So she was supposed to explain, like kind of write out what she would say to a client to explain release of information forms and important things about that. But ChatGPT took it as that has already happened, and now it needed to respond as the client saying like, oh, thank you so much. I didn't know that ChatGPT could do, or not ChatGPT, that the ROI was like that. So I was really confused. I'm like, why? I've never had this before. I've taught this class for 7 years. I've never had this really odd response to it or confusion around it. And then I realized, oh, she probably asked and it interpreted weird. So again, just the more you can refine your prompts, the better and more accurate information you're going to get. Well, I say accurate in terms of for what you're looking for. It may be inaccurate. It makes mistakes, but it can understand what you want better. That kind of goes into that conscious usage. So being mindful of, am I using it to Google things, or am I using it in ways that are helpful to me or to my clients, to what have you. But just being conscious in that usage and prompting it better can kind of cut down on some of that usage. I try not to use it to generate things like videos or images because that uses a lot of energy, or kind of adding it to do or asking it to do an entire slide deck for me. Most of my exchanges is text-based. But researching before use, whether that's for a specific generative AI tool you want to personally use or academically use, but also professionally use. Having that transparency with clients, like we mentioned, maintaining confidentiality when even using it. So if I'm just trying to like role play or asking how to kind of respond to this email, what information do I need to pull out of that so I'm not putting identifiable information into ChatGPT or any other kind of Gen AI tool. Is it HIPAA compliant for what I need to use it for work? Reviewing outputs for bias or mistakes just in general. Does your agency have a policy on AI use? Should you create one? Is that something that you would consider? Like, we have an AI use syllabi statement that we created. So is a policy needed where you're working or what have you, and then just continue learning about it. It continues to evolve. I continue to learn about it, and just trying to stay up on all the changes and what's coming out, what's good about it, what's bad about it. Understanding the more environmental impacts that I don't think people knew about initially, and the more it's been around, the more we can see those impacts on it. I think there are a few things in chat, but I'll get to those in 1 second. And I think that's all that I had. I did have one more thing. I forgot I added this little image, and I guess I lied. I did have it make an image for me for this presentation. So this is just an analogy. I love using like watering can analogies. I love to garden. So I think just if you're interested in using generative AI, or if you do use generative AI, just remember that it's more of that like watering can for us. So it can provide some nourishment, but the soil being our professional knowledge, the seeds of the flowers being our clients, and us being the gardener, like we're doing the work based on our knowledge and what we know and what we're doing with clients. And we can potentially use generative AI for a little extra help if needed or if desired, but it's not to replace us. It's not to replace what we know, what we've learned, and how we can necessarily help our clients. So I thought that was a good analogy to remember. But that is it. On this last slide is my email address. If you have questions, I'm happy to try and answer any additional questions for you. Or again, I will be giving this slide deck to Dr. Frabby, who will make sure it gets out to everybody. But if you have any questions, feel free to put those in chat. We still have a couple minutes to go over anything. So if there's anything I kind of forgot of any other ethical implications you can think of, or tools you're already using that you'd like to share with others so they can consider that, that'd be great. Yes, Dr. Gandy.
Amazing presentation as always. I love all of the content and getting up to date on AI stuff. I always learn something new when I hear you talk about it. Um, so I'm kind of wondering, as we see AI really infiltrating every part of our lives, and frankly, it has been for a long time now without our knowledge. I don't know about you, but I see no real end to the AI movement.
Mhm.
And so it's seems to me like part of what we do when we think about ethics, and what we're called to do as social workers, we do have an obligation to use technology appropriately, and competently. So as we kind of see probably a good amount of hesitancy or just really not wanting to learn about it at all, I'm wondering if that's going to set social workers back, so to speak, kind of technologically wise. Um, because there's already, all like you said, all of those websites of social work note takers and all this stuff. Like I'd be afraid that social workers would kind of, as AI continues to grow, and some social workers who are really not wanting to learn about it or use it, getting kind of further behind. To me, that almost becomes an ethical issue of like, let's keep our practice up to date. Not saying that you have to love AI or even use it, but just I think like showing up at this session is one example of that. But I wondered if you've thought about that at all as like the other side of the coin of ethics, of not only how do we use it appropriately ethically, but also what are the ethical considerations when we don't use it on purpose or don't understand it on purpose.
Yeah, I think it's kind of like almost looking at this generative AI as like the the Y2K, like when the internet first came out, or even calculators, like people didn't want to use that, or you can't use that to help you. So I think it just, we're coming into that kind of again, right? Just with this. And I think too, yeah, I think we could do a disservice if we're not learning more about that. That's not to say that we started a new agency and they're like, hey, we're using this AI platform for notes, and I don't know much about it, or I'm really against it. I think we can leave ourselves in the dark there. But it is a fine line of keeping up, our competence, but also connecting back to those social justice issues that arise from Gen AI use, whether that's environmental justice, whether that's the biases that are surrounding it and what it's been trained on. So I think it's just that it is a difficult line to walk, if I'm being honest, of do I keep up to date with technology, but also be mindful of the harm that the technology is doing or could do, if that makes sense. And that's where I personally teeter between, I think some people are fully embracing it, some people are fully against it. And I think we're going to have to come to this middle ground eventually of I need to continue to keep my practice up to date, with what's out there and what we're doing or what my agency wants me to do, while being mindful of those implications we talked about today. And I don't know if that answers your question, but that's kind of where it's just a fine line, I think, in the sand between those two.
Yeah, I appreciate it. It's more kind of hypothetical or theoretical at this point because we don't know what the future holds, but I do think we can kind of see the direction that things are going. So I appreciate it. It's very thoughtful response. Thanks.
Yeah, of course. And, I think things will continue to change with this. And policies can come down on how far is this going to be allowed to expand, right? Without some sort of not necessarily ramifications, but guidelines around it. Because it is just kind of, I feel like the wild, wild west when it comes to this stuff, where it's just like unfeathered, just allowed to continue to expand and grow. And again, when the internet came about, people had hesitations with that too. I think it can be a great tool, but I think we also just need to outweigh those risks and benefits of its use. and what we're using it for, and how can we consciously use it to stay up with technology, benefit our work with our clients, while also making sure we're not doing harm.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, some folks are dropping in the chat here, and if I may, kind of just share that I think those of us that are justice or equity minded, we give a lot to the mental health field and other fields, and we need to be in those spaces where we're leading change, we're leading the shaping of this work, and just like one person said in the chat, catastrophic apps have come out that are really doing harm with mental health. So I feel like that's the call ethically, is to say, like, if we don't keep up to date with this, then their technology will continue to evolve without us, and they won't get our very needed expertise and perspective. And I think social worker needs to be in the room.
Yeah, and I do think it's not unnecessarily paranoid to have concerns about how far it's going to go. And I don't know that we know that right now. And I think, again, I'm going back to that internet use. Like I said, I'm a millennial. I was born in the 90s. So like, I just remember this internet, and people are like, the world is going to end because the internet is here, and the world did not end. So, I always try to remain on the cup half full with that. But I think it is reasonable to be concerned about how far can it go. But again, it's being trained on data sets. And it's predicting, it's not knowing, if that makes sense. It is getting better from like previous versions, and I just focus on ChatGPT because again, that's what a lot of people have heard of. It is getting better in being more humanistic. I even saw like a job posting for voice actors to be able to read prompts so that the AI could sound more humanistic and more empathic. So again, I think those concerns are certainly valid. And I think at this time, at least from what I know, we also just don't know how far it's going to go. But I also just can't see it replacing us. But again, I might be more positive about it than others might feel. Trying to read through these chats, I'm sorry. I agree, Colleen, certainly. I worked in residential care, worked in emergency shelter care with youth, and the amount of time documentation took, and the quick turnaround that things needed to be done. Like I remember I had like 3 days to get an assessment into the system for licensing. So I do think that it can be a good tool that can, if people are wanting and willing to use, can help us maybe not prevent burnout, but reduce that, and be more present with our clients. I don't have to, again, I know how my brain works, and trying to focus on what someone's saying while also remembering to take notes, while also trying to remember what they said, and everything else going on in my brain. Could that AI note-taking tool help me feel more present with my client using my skills? That I don't have to necessarily focus as much on the documentation piece, reviewing it, of course, right? Like, what did it say? Do I need to tweak things? Was it biased? Did it pick up on all those nuances? Stuff like that. But I agree. I think depending on how you're feeling about it, it definitely can have its place. Seeing if I missed anything else. Yes. Thank you, Colleen, for that. Any other questions? I think we've got about 5 more minutes. I really appreciated the chat and the dialogue. Lots of things to think. I might have missed some.
I was just gonna jump in and say I often use it for, for the creativity side. Sometimes I get stuck or, from teaching or with the client or whatnot, and I feel stuck. And then AI will just help me trigger of like, oh, this is a good idea you could do for an activity or for engagement. And that's been really helpful.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, you know, if
Mhm.
I still was working in residential care, I think I would have really appreciated some creative help when I came up with group ideas to use with 12 to 17-year-olds who don't want to hear me talk in general. You know, I can come up with some ideas, but I think that would have been helpful too, a tool
Mhm.
to have. Just again, to do more and do better for
Yeah.
our clients if we feel like we need that assistance at times.
Mhm.
Definitely. Um, I will, Emily, I will send Dr. Fabry some information that she can kind of send out with the slides too of some recommendations and places to start for that.
But Chalice, I just kind of struggle with like, is this going to help our critical thinking or hinder it? You know,
Hmm.
AI, and I kind of like go back, and then I kind of also go back and forth. It's like this is exciting, but it's also scary. So I kind of feel
Hmm.
like I go back and forth on these, especially with the critical thinking aspect of it. And I guess it just depends on what you're using it for, and I don't know.
Yeah, I think it is, what are you using it for? Are you like, I know some of us are in higher ed, so it's easier to say like, am I copying and pasting the discussion prompt and then just copying and pasting what it gave me? Of course, that's removing critical thought, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I think if I'm prompting it to do something, like let's say I'm writing a paper and I have all these points I know I already want to write about, but I know there's something missing and I can't think of it, and I'm asking it, I've got these points. What else am I missing here? And it gives me an output of this, right? So like, yes, that critical thinking piece was missing in that moment, but then I can take what it gave me and do my own research on it and continue to build on my own understanding of material. So I think in some pieces it can diminish the critical thought, and then other pieces it can add to it in terms of my understanding of concepts, what else I can look up and understand and synthesize myself. But that's how I use it. You know, I'm not someone who uses it to just generate output for me and copy and paste it, but more help, if that makes sense, and then kind of synthesizing what it gives me, or using it as a basis, as a starting point, and going off of that.
Yeah,
Um,
that's helpful. I also kind of wonder if I'm overthinking this too. Like I'm thinking, well, if it helps us be more productive in our practice, like is then they're going to be like at some point we're expected to be more productive. You know what I mean? Like
yeah, no,
does it then add like,
yeah.
okay, well, it's making it easier, so you add more, clients to your therapy sessions that day. You know what I mean? I don't know. Maybe I'm
No, no, I
overthinking
completely
it.
agree with that. Yeah, that's like, okay, well now you've cut out 20 hours of your work week because now we use AI for that. So here's this other stuff that
Right.
you can now do because you now have all this time, right? Because you're not doing that. So I think that's a valid concern too. And
Yeah.
I agree with going back to Emily, as someone who is neurodiverse myself, it definitely has helped with brain dump and organizing that thought. So I think that's part of how I use it too. When I do use it, again, I try to use it sparingly, but yeah. Any other comments here? Great conversation. I really appreciate it. I love having all these great brains in here to talk about these things. Yeah, and then just keep doing more. Yeah, I think that's a very valid concern. And Chris, I appreciate you mentioning that. Um, so if we're taking away hours of our work week because now we have AI to do it,
Well,
what could be added?
yeah, so like kind of as a parallel, like those of us in Gen X, like remember when email got popular? So then like email created this whole like you're available all these times
Mm,
and you
sure.
can
Yeah.
handle these things, and it just seemed like it added more. So I don't
Mm.
know. I don't know if there's a parallel there, but you know.
Yeah, I could see that. And I think too, with like what kind of more current generations are being, things that are kind of being generalized about them is that they, can't communicate verbally very well because they are so stuck in kind of written
Hmm.
communication. Yeah, so I think there definitely will be drawbacks to that, and continue to be drawbacks just with anything that kind of is new and emerging. Um, But yeah, I could see that too, that email correlation does make sense. But yeah, any other questions? We're now 1 minute over time. Again, I really appreciate everyone coming and everyone engaging and having these conversations. And again, AI's, I don't see it just going away. And it's kind of, up to us how we want to use it. Does the benefit outweigh the risks? All of those kind of things to remember. But if you have questions, again, my email is on the screen, and I will be getting some additional content and the slide deck over to Dr. Fabry to be able to give out to everyone. So thank you, everyone, again.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dallas. This was very informative, and I think I learned a lot, so I'm hoping a lot of other people did too. So, as I wrote in the chat, the CEs will come from Michael Brown, so make sure you look out for that name. But if you are missing anything, you can email me and I can get that checked for you. But yep, that is all. So thank you again so much.
Yes, thank you, everyone, for coming.
I'm gonna stop.